My soon-to-be ex-husband, 34, male, and I were married for 6 years. When we first met, he seemed like the perfect guy, charming, attentive, successful at his job in pharmaceutical sales, and incredibly loving. We had a whirlwind romance, got engaged after 8 months, and married 6 months after that. The first 2 years were amazing. We bought a beautiful house in the suburbs, traveled to Europe twice, and started talking about having kids. Then things started to change. At first, it was small stuff. He'd come home later and later from work events. His phone would always be face down or locked, and he started picking fights over the smallest things. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always turned it around on me, saying I was being paranoid or controlling. Classic gaslighting, I know now, but at the time I genuinely thought I was being unreasonable. About a year ago, I found out he'd been cheating on me with not one, but 3 different women. One was a coworker, cliche, I know. Another was someone he met at the gym, and the third was his ex from college who had recently moved back to town. I discovered all this when I borrowed his laptop to order groceries because mine was updating and his messaging apps were still logged in. The messages I found were explicit, disrespectful, and in some conversations he was even complaining about me to these women. He called me boring, clingy, and said I was constantly nagging him. The worst part? In some messages he was actively planning to leave me, discussing how to hide his assets, and even joking about how oblivious I was to it all. When I confronted him, he first denied everything and then tried to minimize it. It was just flirting, and then broke down crying and begged for forgiveness, promising to go to therapy and change. Like an idiot, I agreed to try to work things out. We started marriage counseling, and for a few months he seemed to be trying. Then I caught him texting one of the women again. That was the final straw. I told him I wanted a divorce and moved out to a small apartment across town. This is where his mother, my mother-in-law, 58, female, enters the story. She's always been overbearing and clearly believes her son can do no wrong. Throughout our marriage, she would make little comments about how I should be more supportive of his career, how I should dress differently to keep his attention, and how I wasn't nurturing his potential. I tolerated it because I loved him and wanted to keep the peace, but looking back, I should have seen the red flags. After I moved out, she called me almost daily, leaving voicemails about how marriage takes work and how all men make mistakes. I ignored her calls and focused on building my new life and working with my lawyer to start divorce proceedings. My ex contested the divorce and was fighting for a larger share of our assets, claiming that since he was the primary breadwinner, he made about 20% more than me. Hardly a massive difference. He deserved to keep the house and most of our investments. He also tried to claim that I had been emotionally abusive, which was both false and rich coming from him. 2 weeks ago, my mother-in-law showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Saturday morning. I was in my pajamas, hadn't had my coffee yet, and was completely caught off guard. She was all smiles, holding a bag from a local bakery, and asked if we could have a woman-to-woman talk. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She sat down at my small kitchen table and started with what seemed like a genuine apology for her son's behavior. She admitted he had made poor choices, understatement of the year, and said she was ashamed of him. She told me she still loved me like a daughter and wanted to make sure I was okay. For a brief moment, I actually believed her. Then she asked to use my bathroom. She was in there for an unusually long time, but I didn't think much of it at the time. When she came back, she continued her seemingly heartfelt conversation, even suggesting that she could help mediate between me and her son to reach a fair settlement. She said she just wanted what was best for both of us. After about an hour, she hugged me goodbye and left, saying she hoped we could maintain a relationship even after the divorce. That evening, I went to clean the bathroom and noticed something odd. My prescription bottles in the medicine cabinet had been rearranged. I'm very particular about how I organize my medications. I take antidepressants and anxiety medication that I started after discovering my husband's affairs, and they were definitely not how I left them. Something felt off. So I decided to check the rest of the apartment. In the trash can in my bedroom, tucked under some tissues, I found an empty mini bottle of vodka, the kind you get on airplanes. I don't drink hard liquor at all due to a family history of alcoholism. That's when it hit me. She wasn't there to apologize or check on me. She was there to plant evidence that I was unstable, mixing prescription drugs and alcohol to help her son's case. I immediately called my lawyer and explained the situation. He advised me to document everything, take photos of the bottle, write down exactly what happened during her visit, and check if anything else seemed out of place. I got a text from my ex saying he was concerned about my well being and had heard I was struggling. He suggested that maybe I should focus on getting better rather than dragging out the divorce. The audacity. I didn't respond, but I forwarded the message to my lawyer. 3 days later, my neighbor, who has a doorbell camera, mentioned that she saw my mother in law taking pictures of my apartment building and car when she left that day. I asked if she could share the footage, which clearly showed my mother in law walking around my car, taking photos from different angles, and then standing across the street photographing my building. Again, I sent this to my lawyer. The most bizarre twist? My lawyer did some digging and discovered that my mother in law had accidentally left location tracking on when she posted on Facebook later that day. The post was about having a wonderful visit with a dear friend. Yeah, right. But the location tagged was a liquor store about a mile from my apartment, presumably where she bought the mini vodka bottle to plant. Everything came to a head when my lawyer submitted all this evidence to the court, including affidavits from my therapist confirming I don't drink alcohol with my medication, the doorbell footage and screenshots of the Facebook post with the location data. The judge was not amused by these attempts to manipulate the proceedings. I'm still processing all of this, but I wanted to share because it's so absurd that I almost can't believe it happened. The divorce isn't finalized yet, but my lawyer says this evidence of my ex and his mother's behavior has significantly strengthened my position. I'll update when there are new developments, but for now, I'm just trying to focus on healing and moving forward. Edit. Thank you all for the supportive comments and advice. To answer some common questions, yes, I've changed all my locks and installed a security camera. No, I haven't confronted my mother-in-law directly about this. My lawyer advised against it. And yes, I am in therapy and working on processing all of this. Update 1. First of all, I want to thank everyone for the overwhelming support on my original post. Your comments and messages have been a lifeline during one of the most stressful periods of my life. So much has happened in the past few days that I'm still trying to process it all, but I promise an update, so here it is. 3 days after my original post, my lawyer called with news that made my jaw drop. Apparently, my mother-in-law wasn't done with her schemes. My lawyer had filed a motion for an emergency hearing based on the evidence of tampering and harassment. The day before the hearing, my ex's lawyer reached out to mine requesting a private settlement discussion. During this discussion, they presented what they claimed was concerning evidence about my mental state. Photos of pill bottles clearly taken in my bathroom during mother-in-law's visit. The vodka bottle now in my trash, which mother-in-law had planted. And get this, witness statements from neighbors claiming they had seen me acting erratically and bringing strange men home late at night. The neighbors' statements were completely fabricated. I've been a hermit since moving into the apartment, focusing on work and healing. The only visitors I've had were my sister, my best friend, who's a woman, my lawyer, who came by once to pick up some documents, and of course the sneaky mother-in-law. My lawyer immediately recognized this as an attempt to intimidate me into accepting a less favorable settlement and told them we would be proceeding with the hearing. Here's where it gets even more bizarre. The day of the hearing, I arrived at the courthouse to find my ex looking smug and my mother-in-law sitting beside him, wearing what I can only describe as her church clothes, conservative dress, pearl necklace, the works. She was clearly trying to present herself as the concerned, respectable mother-in-law. During the hearing, my lawyer presented all the evidence of mother-in-law's attempted setup, the doorbell camera footage, Facebook post with the liquor store location tag, and a statement from my therapist confirming I don't drink alcohol due to my family history and medication regimen. We also presented text messages from my ex showing how he had tried to use this false evidence to pressure me into dropping my claims. Then came the bombshell. My lawyer had subpoenaed security footage from my apartment building's lobby and hallways. The footage clearly showed mother-in-law entering my apartment building with just her purse and then leaving with her purse looking noticeably fuller. Most damning of all was the footage of her stopping in the lobby, taking something out of her purse that looked like mini alcohol bottles, checking to make sure no one was watching, and then putting them back in her purse before exiting the building. The judge was visibly annoyed. She called a brief recess, and when court resumed, my ex's lawyer was practically tripping over himself to withdraw the evidence they had presented. The judge wasn't having it. She issued a stern warning about tampering with evidence and attempting to manipulate court proceedings. She also granted a temporary restraining order against my mother-in-law, barring her from coming within 500 feet of me or my residence. After the hearing, I was walking to my car when I overheard my mother-in-law in the parking lot absolutely berating my ex. She was saying things like, "I did what you asked me to do, and now I look like a criminal." And, "You told me this would work." My ex was trying to quiet her down, looking around nervously to see if anyone was listening. I ducked behind a column and recorded a bit of their conversation on my phone before leaving. I sent the recording to my lawyer as soon as I got home. The next day, I received an email from my ex's lawyer indicating that they were now open to a more equitable distribution of assets and willing to expedite the divorce process. In other words, they knew they were screwed and were trying to cut their losses. But wait, there's more. Yesterday, my sister called to tell me that my mother-in-law had been posting about me on Facebook. She didn't use my name, but it was obvious who she was talking about. She claimed that I had manipulated the situation and tricked her into helping me win the divorce. According to her twisted narrative, she had innocently visited me to offer support, and I had somehow set her up to look bad in court. She described herself as a caring mother-in-law who was only trying to help both sides reach an amicable resolution. Several mutual friends have reached out to check on me after seeing those posts, confused about what would actually happen. I've been careful not to engage in social media drama, simply telling them that the court records speak for themselves and I'm focusing on moving forward. On a more positive note, this whole fiasco has significantly strengthened my position in the divorce. My lawyer is now pushing for me to receive the house, which I originally wasn't even asking for, a larger percentage of our investment accounts, and potentially even having my ex cover all my legal fees due to his and his mother's behavior. While I'm not counting on getting everything, it's looking incredibly likely that the settlement will be much more favorable to me than initially expected. I've also started looking for a new apartment in a different part of town, one with better security. Despite the restraining order, I don't trust my mother-in-law to stay away, and I want to make a fresh start somewhere she doesn't know the address. My therapist has been amazing through all of this, helping me process the anger and betrayal I feel, not just from my ex's cheating, but from this elaborate attempt to paint me as unstable. It's one thing to cheat on your spouse, but trying to manipulate the legal system to avoid the consequences of your actions takes the betrayal to a whole new level. I'll update again when there are more developments, but for now, I'm cautiously optimistic that the worst is behind me. I'm focusing on self-care, leaning on my support system, and looking forward to the day when this divorce is finalized and I can truly begin a new chapter. Thank you again for all your kind words and support. It means more than you know. Edit. To answer some common questions, 1. Yes, my lawyer is exploring whether my mother-in-law's actions constitute a crime, tampering with evidence, perjury, etc. 2. No, I haven't blocked my ex or mother-in-law on social media because my lawyer advised me to keep monitoring their public posts for any additional evidence. 3. Yes, I'm documenting everything, including all communications and social media posts. 4. Several people have suggested I could sue for defamation. I'm discussing all legal options with my lawyer, but right now focusing on finalizing the divorce. Update 2. It's been another wild few days, and I want to thank everyone again for the incredible support. Your messages have been a bright spot during this incredibly stressful time. I've been hesitant to post another update because things have been moving so quickly. But I promise to keep you all informed, so here goes. First, the good news. My lawyer and I met with my ex and his lawyer for settlement negotiations. After the disastrous court hearing and the clear evidence of their tampering attempts, they came to the table ready to make concessions. My ex looked exhausted and defeated. Apparently, the reality of how his and his mother's actions have affected his position is finally sinking in. We've reached a tentative settlement agreement that is significantly more favorable than what was initially on the table. I'll be keeping the house, which I wanted primarily because I had put so much work into renovating it, receiving 60% of our investment accounts versus the 50-50 split I was originally hoping for. And my ex has agreed to cover all legal fees, which have become substantial due to their antics. His lawyer practically begged us not to pursue criminal charges against mother-in-law for the evidence tampering, which my lawyer is using as leverage to ensure my ex complies with all settlement terms. Now for the more complicated update. My mother-in-law has somehow managed to escalate her behavior despite the restraining order. She hasn't approached me directly, but she's been on a social media rampage. She's now telling everyone who will listen that I set her up and manipulated her motherly concern to win the divorce. According to her twisted narrative, I invited her over deliberately left out pill bottles and alcohol for her to find, and somehow knew she would report it to my ex. She's painting herself as a victim of my devious manipulation. The wildest part, some people are actually believing her. My ex's family, unsurprisingly, is rallying behind her version of events. A few mutual friends, who I thought were reasonable people, have reached out asking for my side of the story, as if there's any validity to her claims. I've been referring them to the court records and the video evidence, which usually settles the matter, but it's exhausting having to defend myself against such absurd accusations. 3 days ago, I received a certified letter from a lawyer representing my mother-in-law, demanding that I cease and desist defaming her character and remove all false statements about her from social media and retract them to mutual acquaintances. The irony is palpable considering I've barely posted anything on social media throughout this ordeal, while she's been broadcasting her fabricated version of events to anyone who will listen. My lawyer responded with a terse letter outlining the evidence we have, including the security footage and her own recorded statements in the courthouse parking lot, and advised that any further legal action on her part would result in a countersuit for defamation with the actual evidence to back it up. We haven't heard back from her lawyer since. In a bizarre twist, my ex called me directly yesterday, against the advice of his lawyer, I'm sure. He sounded defeated and surprisingly apologetic. He admitted that the entire scheme with planting evidence was his idea, not his mother's, though she had eagerly participated. According to him, he was desperate and panicking about the financial implications of the divorce. And his mother had convinced him that I was out to destroy him. He claimed he now realizes how wrong he was and wanted to apologize. I listened silently, not offering forgiveness or engaging beyond acknowledging that I'd heard him. When he finished, I simply told him that all future communication should go through our lawyers and hung up. I immediately called my lawyer to report the conversation, who advised me to continue keeping detailed records of any direct contact attempts. On the advice of many commenters on my previous updates, I've installed additional security cameras at my current residence and have been approved for a new apartment in a secured building across town. The move-in date is still 3 weeks away, but knowing I'll soon have a fresh start somewhere my ex and mother-in-law don't know about has been a tremendous relief. My employer has been surprisingly understanding throughout this ordeal. When I explained the situation, including showing my boss the restraining order, they offered me flexible working hours and the option to work remotely on days when I need to attend court or meet with my lawyer. They've also allowed me to use a different entrance to the building and park in a secured area just in case my mother-in-law decides to accidentally run into me at work. I'll update again when the settlement is finalized or if anything significant changes. For now, I'm focusing on staying safe, documenting everything, and preparing for my move. Thank you all again for your support and advice. It has truly been a lifeline during this chaotic time. Update 3. It's been almost 2 weeks since my last update, and I've been hesitant to post because I wanted to wait until things were truly resolved. I'm happy to say I'm finally seeing light at the end of this long, dark tunnel. First, the divorce settlement has been officially approved by the judge. It's done. After all the drama, the lies, the manipulation, and the stress, I am legally divorced. When my lawyer called with the news, I broke down crying, not from sadness, but from pure relief. The weight that lifted from my shoulders in that moment was indescribable. The final settlement terms were even better than the tentative agreement we had reached. I got the house, 65% of our investment accounts, up from the 60% we had initially agreed upon. And my ex is covering all my legal fees. The judge cited the behavior and attempted manipulation of court proceedings as the reason for the favorable ruling. Now for the mother-in-law saga. Remember how in my last update I mentioned she had sent me a cease and desist letter through her lawyer? Well, 2 days after I received that letter, she showed up at my workplace. She somehow managed to get past the front desk by claiming she was delivering documents I needed urgently. Thankfully, our receptionist called to confirm with me before sending her to my office, and I immediately alerted building security. They escorted her out, but not before she created a scene in the lobby, shouting that I was a manipulative witch who had destroyed her son. The entire incident was captured on the building security cameras, and several of my co-workers witnessed her meltdown. I immediately called my lawyer and the police to report the violation of the restraining order. This time, the police took it seriously. They arrested her for violating the order and for causing a disturbance. She spent the night in jail before being released on bail with strict conditions, including wearing an ankle monitor to ensure she stays at least 1,000 feet away from me. The judge doubled the original distance. My ex called me in a panic after his mother's arrest, begging me to drop the charges. He claimed she was not mentally well and needed help, not punishment. I told him what I should have said years ago, that his and his mother's problems are not mine to fix, and that actions have consequences. I suggested he focus on getting her the mental health support she apparently needs, rather than trying to make me responsible for cleaning up their messes yet again. The most surprising development came 3 days after mother-in-law's arrest. My former sister-in-law, my ex's younger sister, reached out to me via email. We had always gotten along well during my marriage, but I assumed she'd side with her family after the divorce. Instead, her email was full of apologies and support. She explained that she's been watching this situation unfold with horror and has been trying to convince her mother to seek therapy for years. According to her, my mother-in-law has a long history of inappropriate involvement in her children's relationships. She apparently drove away several of my ex's previous girlfriends before me and has been equally meddlesome in my sister-in-law's love life. She shared stories of how her mother had installed tracking apps on her phone well into her 20s, showed up unannounced at her college dorm to check on her, and once followed her on a date and sat at a nearby table taking photos. My sister-in-law moved across the country after college, partly to get some distance from her mother's controlling behavior. She said she wasn't surprised by what happened, but was deeply ashamed that she hadn't warned me more explicitly when I married into the family. The most validating part of her email was her confirmation that the evidence planting scheme was indeed my ex's idea, not just something he claimed in his apology call to shift blame. Apparently, he had called his sister before executing the plan, looking for her approval, which she vehemently denied. She had told him it was dishonest, potentially illegal, and would likely backfire, but he was convinced it would work because Mom is so good at this kind of thing. The fact that he was bragging about his mother's skill at manipulation speaks volumes about the family dynamics I was entangled in. My sister-in-law also revealed that since mother-in-law's arrest, several extended family members have come forward with their own stories of her boundary violations and manipulative behavior over the years. It seems her arrest was a breaking point that has fractured the family's long-standing pattern of enabling her behavior. Some relatives are insisting that she get professional help as a condition of maintaining relationships with them and their children. As for my personal life, I moved into my new apartment last weekend. It's in a secure building within 24-hour doorman service, key fob access to all common areas, and no connection to my previous addresses. I've only shared my new address with a trusted circle of friends and family, none of whom have any contact with my ex or his family. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up to check if my security cameras had detected movement. I've also started seeing a new therapist who specializes in recovery from narcissistic abuse, which has been eye opening. She's helping me recognize patterns in my marriage that I normalized or overlooked, and working with me to establish healthier boundaries in all my relationships. One of the most painful realizations has been identifying how my own family background made me susceptible to my ex's manipulation. I grew up with a father who was emotionally volatile and a mother who constantly made excuses for him, which created a template for accepting unacceptable behavior from partners. Work has been a surprising source of stability throughout this chaos. My boss pulled me aside after the mother in law incident at our office and told me the company would support me pressing charges and would provide any documentation needed. Several colleagues who witnessed her meltdown have stopped by my office to check on me, bringing coffee or small gifts that have touched me deeply. One coworker even offered to help me move, saying she went through a similar situation with an ex years ago and remembers how overwhelming it felt to pack up a life while dealing with legal and emotional turmoil. I started rebuilding my social life as well. During my marriage, I had gradually lost touch with several close friends, partly due to normal life circumstances, but also because my ex would subtly criticize them or make spending time with them difficult. I've reconnected with two college friends who live nearby. We've established a weekly dinner tradition that has become a highlight of my week. They've been incredible, listening to my story without judgment and reminding me of who I was before this relationship dimmed my light. The most unexpected positive development has been a reconnection with my passion for painting. I used to paint regularly before getting married, but somehow never found the time during my marriage. My new apartment has a small nook with perfect natural light that I've set up as a mini studio. I've been painting almost every evening after work. Nothing masterful, just abstract expressions of the emotions I'm processing. The act of creating something beautiful from all this pain has been profoundly healing. Financially, I'm in a much better position than I expected to be post divorce. Between keeping the house, which has appreciated significantly since we bought it, receiving the majority of our investments, and not having to pay my own legal fees, I've emerged with my financial future secure. I've scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor next week to discuss the best way to manage these assets going forward and create a solid plan for my future. As for my ex, I've heard through mutual acquaintances that he's moving in with his mother temporarily to keep an eye on her after her arrest. The irony of this situation isn't lost on me. He's now experiencing firsthand the controlling behavior I described throughout our marriage that he always dismissed as me exaggerating. According to my former sister in law, their mother is micromanaging every aspect of his life, from what he eats to who he talks to, under the guise of helping him through this difficult time. She's also apparently showing up unannounced at his workplace to bring him lunch and check on him, much to his embarrassment. Some people have been asking if I feel vindicated by how everything has turned out, and the honest answer is both yes and no. Yes, I feel validated that the truth came to light and that the legal system recognized the manipulation for what it was. But there's no real victory in watching a family implode, even one that treated me poorly. Mostly, I feel gratitude for my escape and compassion for those who still are entangled in these unhealthy dynamics. Looking back on this entire ordeal, I can see now that the seeds of its end were planted at the beginning. The red flags were there, my ex's charm that masked a profound insecurity, his mother's inappropriate involvement in our relationship, the subtle ways he would shift blame and responsibility like many people in toxic relationships. I didn't recognize these patterns until I was already deeply invested. I share this not to blame myself. I know now that the manipulation was not my fault, but as a reminder that healing includes acknowledging how we got here so we don't find ourselves on the same path again. To everyone who has followed my story and offered support, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your validation and advice help me stay strong during the darkest moments. To anyone reading this who recognizes elements of their own relationship in my story, please know that there is life on the other side of toxicity. It's not an easy journey, but it's worth every difficult step. I likely won't be posting further updates as I'm ready to close this chapter and focus on writing the next one where I'm the author of my own story, not a character in someone else's manipulation. I'm cautiously optimistic about the future, and for the first time in years, I am excited to discover who I am and what I want without the cloud of gaslighting and emotional abuse obscuring my view. Edit. Thank you for all the awards and supportive comments. Several people have asked if I'm considering writing a book about this experience. While I'm flattered, right now I'm focused on healing and moving forward. Maybe someday, when I have more distance from these events, I'll consider sharing my story in a more comprehensive way if it might help others recognize and escape similar situations. Stay tuned for more stories from Our Girl Relationships.